The sins that are destroying your spiritual life right now are probably not the ones you confess on Sunday. They are not the ones that make the famous lists. They are not the ones your pastor preaches about most often. They are the quiet ones, the ones that have no obvious name, the ones that look so much like normal Christian behavior that you have never once thought to bring them before God. And they are doing more damage to your faith than anything you have ever openly struggled with. I want to say something before we begin that I need you to hear clearly. This message is not about shame. It is not about adding to the weight of a believer who is already carrying too much. And it is absolutely not about creating a new standard of perfection that nobody can reach. This message is about something far more specific and far more urgent than that. It is about the spiritual damage that happens not in the dramatic moments of obvious failure, but in the quiet, ordinary, unremarkable patterns of daily life that nobody ever identifies as sin because they look too normal to be dangerous. The church has done an excellent job of warning us about the visible sins: addiction, immorality, dishonesty, violence. These are preached about consistently, addressed directly, and most believers have at least some level of consciousness about them, even when they struggle with them. But there is another category of sin that Scripture addresses just as seriously, and the church almost never talks about. Sins that operate in silence. Sins that wear the disguise of personality traits, temperamental tendencies, or even spiritual virtues. Sins that do not feel like sin from the inside, and yet produce the same fruit that all sin produces: separation from God, weakened faith, closed doors, blocked breakthrough, a spiritual life that looks alive on the outside and is slowly dying on the inside. Romans 3:23 tells us that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Not some, all. And the gap between where we are and where God's glory is, that gap is not always created by the obvious sins. Sometimes it is widened quietly, gradually, invisibly, by 7 specific patterns that most believers carry for years without ever recognizing them as the spiritual problem they actually are. Today, we are going to name them. We are going to look at each one honestly, and we are going to give God permission to do what He has always wanted to do with them, not condemn us for carrying them, but free us from the weight of them. Because the spiritual life you have been praying for, the breakthrough, the clarity, the genuine intimacy with God that seems just out of reach, may be on the other side of addressing sins you did not even know you were committing. Here are the 7 silent sins. Let every one of them land with honest weight, because the one that convicts you most deeply is probably the one that's been working against you the longest. This is the sin that has destroyed more spiritual lives than almost any other on this list, and it is treated in most Christian circles as a harmless personality tendency rather than a serious spiritual problem that Scripture identifies it as. You sit in church and you compare your faith to the person next to you. You scroll through Christian content and you measure your spiritual life against the testimonies you see. You hear someone describe their prayer life, their breakthrough, their encounter with God, and instead of being moved by what God did for them, something tightens in your spirit, something diminishes, and you walk away from the comparison not inspired, but quietly despairing. And you have never once thought to bring that feeling to God as a sin, because it does not feel like a sin. It feels like a struggle. It feels like a personality trait you were born with. But Galatians 6:4 identifies it with a precision that removes every excuse. Each one should test their own actions. Then they can take pride in themselves alone, without comparing themselves to someone else. Without comparing. God's instruction is not to compare better, not to compare less, without comparing. Because comparison in any direction takes your eyes off the unique assignment God has placed on your specific life and redirects them toward a standard that was never designed for you. I remember a woman in our congregation who had a genuinely beautiful prayer life, hours with God, consistent, fruitful, and she destroyed it, not through laziness, not through rebellion, but through comparison. She began following a minister online whose prayer life made hers feel inadequate by comparison. And slowly, gradually, she stopped praying not because she had lost her desire for God, but because the comparison had convinced her that her version of prayer was not good enough to bring him. The enemy did not need to attack her prayer life directly. He just needed to hand her a mirror that showed someone else's reflection, and she did the rest herself. 2 Corinthians 10:12 says, "When they measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves with themselves, they are not wise." Not wise. The Bible does not say comparison is human. It says it is unwise. And an unwise spiritual practice, repeated consistently, produces unwise spiritual fruit. How to address it? The next time comparison rises in your spirit, name it out loud. This is comparison. This is not from God. And then redirect, not to your own accomplishments, but to your own calling. Ask God, what have you specifically assigned to me? Because the answer to that question is the only standard your spiritual life was ever designed to be measured by. This is the sin that the most mature, most educated, most theologically sophisticated believers are most susceptible to, because it does not feel like unbelief from the inside. It feels like discernment. It feels like experience. It feels like the wisdom of someone who has been around long enough to know how things actually work. But underneath the language of wisdom, underneath the careful theological qualifications and the balanced perspectives and the realistic expectations, is a heart that has quietly stopped believing that God can do what He said He could do in your specific situation, in your specific lifetime, for your specific life. Hebrews 11:6 does not leave room for this kind of comfortable middle ground. Without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to Him must believe that He exists and that He rewards those who earnestly seek Him. Rewards, not might reward, not rewards sometimes under ideal circumstances, rewards those who earnestly seek Him. I have watched believers dismantle their own miracles before they arrived, not through obvious rebellion, but through the sophisticated language of theological realism. God can heal, but He does not always choose to. True. God can provide, but He works through natural means most of the time. True. God can open that door, but it has been closed a long time, and maybe this is not His will. Possibly true. But here is the question that theological realism never honestly asks. When was the last time this person believed God for something impossible and received it? When was the last time they prayed with genuine expectation rather than carefully managed hope? When was the last time their faith produced something that could not be explained by anything else than God? Mark 9:24 records the most honest prayer in the New Testament. A desperate father looking at his suffering son said, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." Not "I have perfect faith," not "I am believing for the miracle." The raw, vulnerable, completely honest admission that both things were true simultaneously, and the courage to bring both to Jesus rather than hiding the unbelief behind the language of wisdom. How to address it? Ask yourself honestly, in your current prayer life, is there anything you are believing God for that would require an actual miracle to receive? If the answer is no, if every prayer you are praying has a natural explanation that does not require God to move supernaturally, that may be the most honest indicator that wisdom has quietly replaced faith somewhere in your spiritual life. This is the sin that the modern Christian emotional wellness movement has made almost impossible to identify, because the language we use to describe it, I need to feel God's presence, I need to feel His peace, I need to feel His love, sounds deeply spiritual. It sounds like genuine hunger for God. But there is a version of this need that has quietly crossed a line, a version where the feeling has become the faith, where the experience has become the evidence, where the emotional encounter with God is not the fruit of your faith, it's the foundation of it. And when the feeling is absent, when the worship doesn't move you, and the prayer feels dry, and the presence doesn't come the way you have come to expect it, your faith collapses. Not because God left, but because you had been worshiping the feeling of God rather than the God behind the feeling. Jeremiah 17:9 gives us an honest assessment of the human heart that most people resist applying to their spiritual life. The heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? The heart is deceitful. That means the feelings your heart produces, including spiritual feelings, are not always reliable guides to spiritual truth. And a faith that is built on the reliability of your emotional experience is built on something that God Himself identifies as deceitful. Job lost everything: his health, his children, his wealth, his comfort. And there came a point in Job's suffering where God felt completely absent, where the silence was deafening, where not a single feeling of divine presence remained. And Job did not abandon his faith, not because he still felt God's presence, but because his faith was built on the knowledge of God's character. Though he slay me, yet will I hope in him. Job 13:15. How to address it? The next time you enter prayer or worship, deliberately set aside the expectation of a specific emotional experience. Come to God not as someone seeking a feeling, but as someone honoring a person. Lord, I come to you not because I feel your presence right now, but because I know who you are. That single shift from emotional expectation to character-based trust is one of the most mature spiritual movements a believer can make. If this message is already naming something in your spiritual life that you have never been able to identify before, brother, sister, please subscribe to this channel right now and write in the comments, "Lord, show me the silent sins that are destroying my spiritual life." That is one of the most courageous prayers a believer can pray, because God will answer it, and the answer will set you free. Let us continue, because the next 4 silent sins are the ones that do the most damage in the longest silence. This is the sin that hides most effectively behind the language of surrender, because surrender is a genuine biblical virtue. Let go and let God is a real spiritual principle. Trusting God with outcomes that are beyond your control is genuine faith. And the line between genuine surrender and sinful passivity is one that most believers have never been taught to see clearly. But there is a version of surrender that is not surrender at all. It is spiritual laziness wrapped in the language of trust. It is the refusal to take the action God has clearly called you to take, hidden behind the comfortable declaration that you are waiting on God. It is the consistent pattern of praying for things that require your obedience to arrive while remaining comfortably passive in the name of faith. James 2:17 makes this distinction with a clarity that leaves no room for comfortable passivity. In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. Dead faith. Not weak faith, not immature faith, dead. And a dead faith cannot produce living results, no matter how sincerely it is prayed or how long it is maintained. I think of the man at the pool of Bethesda in John 5. He had been lying there for 38 years, waiting, and Jesus asked him a question that seems almost cruel in its directness. Do you want to get well? 38 years at the pool, and Jesus asked if he wanted to get well. Because the man's behavior, his consistent passivity over 38 years, was raising a legitimate question about whether his desire for healing was genuine or comfortable. And the moment Jesus told him to pick up his mat and walk, the healing required an active response. Not a prayer, not a declaration, a physical act of faith that ended the passivity. What mat has God been telling you to pick up? What action has He been clearly calling you toward that you have been calling surrender while actually practicing avoidance? How to address it? Make a list of the things you have been waiting on God about for more than 6 months, and then honestly ask for each item, has God already shown me what to do here? Is this genuine waiting, or is this spiritual passivity in disguise? Because the answer to that question may change everything about what happens next in your spiritual life. This is the sin of the modern Christian consumer, and it is so embedded in the structure of how most believers practice their faith today that it is almost invisible as a spiritual problem. You listen to sermons, you watch biblical content, you consume devotionals, podcasts, worship playlists, Christian books, you attend services, you receive prayer,
You participate in the spiritual consumption that the modern Christian ecosystem makes extraordinarily easy and extraordinarily comfortable, and you never stop to ask the question that Scripture places at the very center of what it means to follow Jesus. What are you doing with what you are receiving? Luke 12:48 records Jesus making a statement about receiving that most Christian consumers have never applied to their spiritual lives. From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded, and from the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked. Given much, demanded much, entrusted much, asked much. The standard of accountability is directly proportional to the standard of receiving, and if you have been receiving through years of sermons, years of Christian content, years of biblical teaching, and not contributing, not serving, not using what you have received to invest in others, then you are operating in a pattern that Jesus directly connects to increased accountability. The parable of the talents in Matthew 25 is not about spiritual gifts in the abstract. It is about the specific, practical, and accountable use of what God has entrusted to you. And the servant who buried his talent, who received and hid rather than received and invested, was not praised for his careful stewardship. He was condemned for his spiritual passivity. The master called him wicked and lazy, not well-intentioned, not understandably cautious, wicked and lazy.
How to address it? Ask yourself this question honestly. If God evaluated your spiritual life not by what you have received, but by what you have given, not by the sermons you have heard, but by the lives those sermons have moved you to touch, what would that evaluation look like? And then, today, not eventually, find one specific way to move from consumer to contributor. This is the silent sin that every Christian recognizes in theory and almost nobody addresses in practice, because the defense is always the same, and the defense is always true. Life is busy, the demands are real, the schedule is genuinely full, the responsibilities are legitimate, and the prayer life keeps shrinking not because you do not love God, but because everything else keeps expanding to fill the space that prayer used to occupy. But here is what most believers have never been taught about prayerlessness. It is not just a spiritual discipline problem. It is not just a time management problem. It is a sin, specifically named and specifically condemned in Scripture. 1 Samuel 12:23 records the prophet Samuel making a statement about prayerlessness that most churches have completely stopped quoting. As for me, far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord by failing to pray for you. Sin against the Lord. Prayerlessness is not an inconvenience. It is not a weakness. It is a sin against God, a withholding of the communion He designed the relationship to include. And the busyness defense crumbles when you hold it against the example of Jesus, the Son of God who was healing the sick, preaching to thousands, discipling 12 men, managing the expectations of an entire region, found time to pray, not occasionally, consistently, urgently. Mark 1:35, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. The busiest person who ever walked the earth made prayer his first priority every single morning. If Jesus, with everything on his schedule, could not afford not to pray, then the busyness that is replacing your prayer life is not a reason, it's an excuse, and it is a sin dressed in the language of responsibility. This is the silent sin that has imprisoned more believers for longer periods than any other on this list, because it doesn't feel like sin from the inside. It feels like justice. It feels like appropriate memory. It feels like the reasonable response of a person who was genuinely hurt by a genuine wrong that was never properly acknowledged or addressed. And God does not deny that the hurt was real. He does not minimize what was done to you. He does not ask you to pretend the offense didn't happen or that the wound it created was not deep. What he asks is something far more difficult and far more liberating than pretending. He asks you to release it, completely, from the deepest level of your spirit, not because the person who hurt you deserves to be released, but because you deserve to be free. Hebrews 12:15 identifies the spiritual consequence of held offenses with a word that most believers never connect to their bitterness. See to it that no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. Defile many. The bitterness you are holding privately is not staying private. It's defiling your relationships, your spiritual discernment, your capacity to receive love, your ability to trust, your willingness to believe that the next person who gets close to you will not do the same thing the last person did. I have sat with believers who have been in the same spiritual position for 10, 15, 20 years, same prayer requests, same frustrations, same ceiling on their faith. And in almost every case, when you dig past the surface, there's an offense being held. Sometimes a massive one, sometimes something that seems small from the outside, but an offense that has been rehearsed so many times, revisited so consistently that it has grown into a root system that has wrapped itself around everything in the person's spiritual life and is quietly strangling it. Matthew 18:21-22 records Peter asking Jesus how many times he should forgive someone who sins against him. Up to 7 times? And Jesus answered, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. Some translations say 70 times 7. Either way, the message is the same. The number is not the point. The limitlessness is the point. Forgiveness in Jesus' economy is not a quota to be filled. It's a posture to be maintained, a consistent, ongoing, daily, sometimes moment-by-moment choice to refuse the prison that holding an offense builds around your own spirit. How to address it? Name the offense, specifically, out loud before God. Not to minimize it, but to bring it fully into the light where He can touch it. Lord, this is what was done to me. This is the weight I have been carrying, and I choose right now, not because it was okay, not because they deserved it, I choose to release this to you completely. That prayer, specific, honest, deliberate, is the beginning of a freedom that you may not have experienced in years. I want to say something to close that I hope carries more grace than conviction, even though both are present in what we have discussed today. The 7 silent sins we have talked about: comparison, unbelief disguised as wisdom, emotional idolatry, spiritual passivity, consuming without contributing, prayerlessness disguised as busyness, and holding offenses as a spiritual habit. None of them are unforgivable. None of them are beyond the reach of a God whose mercies are new every morning. None of them disqualify you from the spiritual life you have been praying for. But they do delay it. They do diminish it. They create the distance between where you are and where God has designed you to be, that you have been trying to close through more of the right things, more church, more content, more prayer requests, rather than through addressing the specific silent patterns that have been quietly working against everything you are praying for. Psalm 139:23-24 is one of the most courageous prayers in all of Scripture. Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Any offensive way. Not just the obvious ones, not just the ones that make the famous lists, the silent ones too, the ones hidden behind personality, behind theology, behind busyness, behind the sophisticated language of mature faith. Ask God to search you today, not with the expectation of condemnation, but with the expectation of freedom, because every silent sin He reveals is not an accusation, it is an invitation to the deeper, cleaner, more powerful spiritual life that has been waiting on the other side of the honest examination you have been afraid to make. Write in the comments right now, Lord, search me. Show me the silent sins and set me free from everything that is quietly working against my spiritual life. That is one of the most important prayers you will ever pray, and God answers it with a thoroughness that will surprise you.
If this message has named something in your spiritual life that has gone unnamed for too long, share it with someone who needs to hear it. It could be the word that finally identifies what has been holding them back. Do not forget to subscribe to The Narrow Path so we can keep walking in biblical truth every single week. God bless you deeply, my brother, my sister. Until next time.